First of all, everyone, let's keep things down. We have an infant crawling around in the dungeon. My name is Daniel, and I'm a still life painter, a visual storyteller. I work in oils, producing a series of work I call the Kingdom. Here are some examples of that work. I set these scenarios up in front of me and paint from life, with no preliminary drawing or tracing of photographs.
That's right.
I simply begin drawing in paint, then develop the image by means of what I call stipple glazing. This video will demonstrate the setup process for one such painting. By the time I begin a setup, I often have an idea of where I want to go, but it's always a good idea to turn on my subconscious flow. And since where we're going is to set up a nursery, let's tidy up a little bit. I'm always looking for opportunities to introduce variety into my still lifes. In this case, I decided to have a curved background wall, simply comprised of poster board, something I had not yet done to date. The white poster board and pink base are to approximate the sort of sterile innocence of a nursery. This was an interesting project for me, as I don't have kids, although by marriage I have assumed the privilege of becoming a peepaw nonetheless.
My goodness.
Though I'm not a parent, becoming peepaw later in life is absolutely what motivated me to comment on this subject in the form of a painting. Not to mention, I do have the experience of being a kid. It's always struck me that one of the most difficult things of parenting must be having to stand back and watch as your child makes mistakes, finding their way, navigating life's potential problems, considering what input to offer and when. These were my thoughts when comprising this setup. I found this super cool bottle while recycling. It was in the dumpster on top of a massive pile of bottles. I'd never heard of gunpowder Irish gin. But what an incredible metaphor, and what a visually interesting bottle. Even more so when used to produce one of my so-called luminous shadows.
Luminous Shadows.
Now, what can we add to this already great start? Something meaningful and to the point. Makes me tremble with no.
Thank goodness.
We're looking for what is special. Oh, and one more thing. In this particular instance, there will not be a fruit bowl.
Your day will come.
Find what is special. I found this baby rattle in a flea market. With its eyes discolored from age, it's just downright creepy. And will only become more so when I eventually paint it. At every step along the way, I'm doing my best to visualize, to see the finished painting. This very simple window tool is invaluable along the way, in particular helping you see where elements of your design will break the frame of reference, but also just addressing the composition as a whole. If you work in standardized sizes as I do, make yourself some of these windows in the same proportions.
Why not?
Now, excuse me as I dust off my dollar store rat.
There's no noise for that.
And maybe try not to knock over your hand grenade, because that just sounds dangerous.
Don't knock over your hand grenade. Mic still on?
Sorry, everyone. I simply got lost in the music. Anyway, I've been sitting on this saw blade for some time. Not literally, but holding it back, waiting for a great opportunity to use it. And this is certainly it. These shadows will combine into something amazing.
Combined forces. Greater than the sum of their parts.
I will use a little bit of fishing line to keep it from swinging, holding it where the highlights and the shadow both offer the most visual interest, where they add the most to the overall composition, as well as being a powerful, symbolic threat.
I heard that.
Oh, that side's even more interesting. Take the time to find what is most special, to squeeze the most out of your subject. You will be rewarded for this effort by an ultimately better work of art. And isn't that the point of all this? Challenge yourself.
Okay then.
Put forth that extra effort.
Art deserves extra effort.
Take time to experiment. There's really no replacement for that. I'm doing everything I can at the setup stage to compose the finished painting. However, at the time of painting, my goal is never to simply copy what is in front of me, but rather to take what I've done in the setup, that physical reality, and then take it to a higher state by means of paint. Everything I do is to serve the painting.
Serve that painting. Give it everything that you've got.
And to reiterate the point, I'm holding this saw blade in the sweet spot, that pertaining to my seated painter's point of view, of course. Unfortunately, you can't quite catch the highlights in that saw blade in this photograph, but from just a tiny bit further to the right, that saw blade reveals some very complicated, interesting highlights between the rusted and non-rusted metal.
Interesting highlights. On the rusted and non-rusted metal.
And there's a full-on glimpse of the complicated highlights in the saw blade. I mentioned to people that there are tangible benefits from working from life, meaning that there are occasions when only the slightest head movement can find something more interesting than the previous position. And in those instances, I will, of course, choose what is most visually interesting, combining these slight variances in my point of view to comprise the strongest visual image. It reminds me, believe it or not, of the concept of cubism, where, let's say as a still life, a cubist painter may show that coffee cup from multiple angles at the same time. I'm doing nothing like cubism, of course, but I hope you get my point. As I knew where this still life was headed beforehand, in a form of, let's say, pre-production, I had gotten all my, quote, baby props out, made available.
Cool stuff. Babies are cool.
As I've mentioned before, I greatly benefit from having too many choices. It's akin to the idea that, say, as a musician, there must be one perfect note for a particular place and time in a recording, or say as a painter, there must be one perfect color and brushstroke for a particular spot in a painting. Couldn't there also be a perfect prop for any given setup? This idea of a perfect choice is of course subjective, depending upon context. And of course, perfect only in the moment, in that what may be my perfect choice today might not be my perfect choice tomorrow. But having an abundant choice of props collected over the years is of great benefit. It also makes perusing estate sales and flea markets a lot of fun. I am always on high alert for some sort of interesting object that I can use for my purposes. This can often as not mean finding something that's been damaged and in disrepair, but something that I can see potential use in. I have a high skill set in problem solving and fixing, and when I see some object in need of a little love, I get great satisfaction in bringing it back from the dead. I suspect that maybe my fondness for such things is directly tied to my maker's spirit. This seems to be at the heart of everything I do. This is my internal engine that keeps me motivated and moving. I often think of this internal engine, this maker's spirit, as 8-year-old me. Over the years, I have found that staying in touch with this 8-year-old me, my core, is everything. On the few occasions over the years when I have lost touch with this core, I was lost.
You poor thing.
Unrecognizable. My creative pursuits have provided unparalleled joy in my life, providing me with what human beings long for, purpose and meaning. The original music you're listening to is the result of a creative explosion years ago. This was the result of my finally acquiring the means to make recordings. My painting actually stood still for about 5 years as I realized my musical ideas. The experience was so joyous I simply couldn't help myself.
Can't help it. Enter the dragon!
It's very important, ladies and gentlemen, to take the time on occasion to dust your dragon. Now there's a blues song if I've ever heard one. Let me write that down. Speaking of writing, I develop a bit of fiction for each painting. I call it Tales from the Kingdom. To be found on my website. As a general rule, I begin developing the brief fiction at the same time I'm doing the setup, letting one thing inform the other, the result being a denser concept. However, in the case of this painting, I really struggled with what to say. I spent a lot of time internally, mentally assuming the role of a good parent, calling upon my experiences and my observances, wanting to say something wise, I suppose. But every time I began going down one particular road of words, I would begin to backtrack, questioning, finding reasons to not say what I was about to say. This being tied to, I'm sure, of my tendency to consider and process multiple points of view, and to fully realize that there is, of course, no one answer to this subject of parenting, that the best parents are simply doing the best they can to balance providing guidance without being overbearing. The setup we are engaged in here presents us as the parent, as an observer. One of my attempts at writing fiction for this piece was from the perspective of the child, hearing blah, 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 implying that no matter how wise the parent's words might be, it might just be all noise, and that ultimately the individual has to find their own way. This writing was erased. Well, we are definitely zeroing in on this still life setup. The composition is yet another triangle shape, sure enough. Early on, I mentioned that the white background and the pinkish base were there to represent sort of the innocence and purity of a nursery. However, since I have access to a wizard who can see into the future, I will share with you that as the painting developed, I decidedly made the surroundings grittier and a bit darker. There will ultimately be a questionable spatter painted on the left-hand side of the wall, inspired by Rockwell. This takes our pristine nursery idea and sort of merges it with a back alley. Gonna merge the nursery with that alley. I like that. I'm really able to see my finished painting at this moment. The visual drama I'm always seeking is fully realized. I'm only tweaking details to find what best enhances the composition. Everything serves the painting. Oh, and I don't want to forget my plastic hand grenade. Well, we've almost brought this thing home, but there are a couple of tweaks I want to make. Tweaks. In fact, there will be more tweaks beyond this final photograph.
More tweaks.
The title of the painting to be, I've got this, no problem.
No problem.
And oh, what did I finally write on this subject after all my starts and stops? One simple line. Ultimately, I believe in you.
I love you, baby.
I thank you all for sticking with me through this lengthy process. And of course for once again visiting the deep depths of my deepness.